Hello, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here with Jamie Soden, David Joseph, and George Ortega. And we want to talk a little bit about compatibilism and how they redefine free will to something that would give every animal, plant, bacteria, virus a free will. Because they define it so broadly that well, you have free will if no one's holding a gun to your head. So a dandelion grew of its own free will if no one was holding a gun to its head, because that's one way. And it's a biological organism that can respond to its environment in desirable ways. Which I think the key word, I think that came from Daniel Dennett. I can't remember exactly, but I think that definition came from Daniel Dennett. And I'm like, well, the key word being there is desirable. Who's desire? Who says what's desirable and who doesn't? If you desire it, it is desirable. So if the dandelion desires to grow towards wherever the sunlight comes from, then it by their definition, it would be using its free will because no human coerced it into growing towards the sun. So, the compatibilists, they define it, free will, in a way that has nothing to do with causality or determinism or indeterminism. It has nothing to do with what the debate has been about. So perhaps we could talk about the ridiculous ways compatibilists try to maintain some notion of free will so that they can blame they can blame the dandelions for how they grow, or they can blame their dog for shitting on the carpet. Any ideas, guys?
Yeah, I've got an idea. I mean, on a more complex level, I mean, you don't blame a plant for its roots weakening the, concrete joints in your brick walls, do you? You don't blame the tree for, growing and then having the branch, break the window because, it grew too far into your house and stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we don't blame plants like that, and people tend to not blame their dogs or cats when they make a mess by pooping on the carpet or something like that. And you have to wonder, well, why do we blame other humans for things that we don't blame animals for? We don't blame plants for doing what they're doing, and we don't blame tornadoes or hurricanes for the damage they cause. And so I think this reveals that if people who do this, where they blame humans but not these other types of living and perhaps not living things, well, this shows that they believe in some kind of human exceptionalism. That's what it shows to me, anyway.
Yeah, I
So
mean, it's chaos and order. I mean, things still have a cause. I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's a human or an animal. Um, if they're showing like destructive traits, there's always a reason for why um, they're doing that. Yeah.
All right, so let's go through some of the compatibilist definitions just one by one and just like give various examples. I mean, you've begun to do that, Chandler, but let's do that. For example, like, one of them that that is pretty popular is like people will say, well, yes, it was our genes and our unconscious that caused us to do whatever we did, and they like to do this if we do something wrong, but it was we who did it, So it's the fact that it was we who did it that means that like we're fundamental, because that, this has to do with ultimate responsibility also. So like, we're fundamentally responsible because we did it. And
yes.
so let's apply that to, for example, a calculator. A calculator, if you input a few numbers and multiply them or do whatever kind of function you want, according to that definition, a calculator would have a free will. I mean, it's absurd.
Yeah, it is, because like I've explained before, like, because I'm familiar with what you're talking about, George, because I read Salmon Harris's Free Will book, and it showed what Daniel Dennett said, like, well, it's still us doing it. Well, it's still us that's making a choice, even if it's our unconscious and we don't even know how the decision's being made with what information. We're completely in control of it, but it's still us doing it. And so, like I've explained before, your butt has free will because even though that fart is the inevitable consequence of what you ate last night, it's still your butt farting. Therefore, you can credit or blame it, and it deserves heaven or hell.
Michio Kaku made a huge assumption by saying that quantum indeterminism allows or even proves free will or ends. He said it ends the free will debate, and I'm thinking, well, that's absurd because that's like saying if a calculator malfunctions, say if like I don't know, you dropped it or whatever, and the circuits became damaged for whatever reason, and then it started outputting wrong sums, like you typed in 2 plus 2. And it should equals 4, but for some malfunction, if it output like some other number, it means it's malfunctioning, and there's always a reason why it would malfunction.
Yeah, you know what, Jamie? That just reminds me, by this compatibilist definition, like, well, it's your free will if you're doing it. Well, that means that if let's just say that there is a true randomness, so some type of quantum particle in your brain fires off in the wrong direction, and then you start raping everybody due to a random event. Well, that means that you have free will because the random event happened within a particle within your brain. Therefore, you're responsible for what you didn't cause, what you couldn't have done otherwise. So
all right, again, so let's give more examples. So, like, for example, like, rain. If it's raining, that means the raindrops have free will because they're the drops that are falling. Or if it's the sun that's revolving around us, it's revolving around, or we're revolving around it, whatever it's doing. The sun's moving, through the universe. The sun has free will, and the earth has free will. So yeah, basically, it's an absurd kind of like a claim for free will just because like an agent or an object is quote unquote doing something. Can we think of like other kinds of like another kind of compatibilist definition of free will that again is equally absurd? David, are you familiar with any or?
Not really. To be honest, this kind of reminds me of a video that I saw of three Asian gang members. They were walking along, and one of them walks into a post by accident, a metal lamppost, and then all three of them suddenly start attacking this lamppost. They punch it, they kick it, as if they're ascribing free will to the post.
Yeah. It's really kind of funny because like I'm sure I could think up a funny example of now there was this compatibilist who he said that if a child wants to go out and play, and he just goes out to play. But he doesn't wear a coat, and his mother thinks it's cold outside. And if she makes him wear a coat when he goes outside to play, well, then it's not his free will to wear a coat because his mother coerced him into it. But if he grows up after he's been taught to wear a coat, well, then it's his free will because his mother's no longer physically present, but he's still in the habit of wearing a coat. And I'm like, that makes no sense because it's completely missing the point that the cause of wearing a coat is because you feel cold and you need a coat to help you keep warm. It has nothing to do with the kid's mother. I mean, seriously.
Yeah, and I was watching this Through the Wormhole documentary episode on free will where I think he's a compatibilist. He didn't say he was, but this does sound like compatibilism to me. He said just because drivers have a responsibility to drive a certain way, don't do the speed limit, don't go through red traffic lights and stuff like that. You need to be aware of what everyone else is doing on the roads and stuff. He was saying, how could I put this? Cars function on deterministic laws, but he was saying just because we can control cars like in a certain way, be aware of everyone else, he was saying that proves free will, and I'm thinking that's stupid because brains still function on deterministic laws. It's still clockwork.
Well, since you brought up cars, Jamie, I have another great one. If a car crashes into somebody and kills them, well, the
Yeah.
car can be blamed because the car it was the free will of the car, because even though the car was driven by a human, it was still the car that crashed into him, so you blame the car.
Okay, guys, another version of compatibilism has to do with physicality and non-physicality. In other words, they'll again, as we know, compatibilists basically accept, or they claim to accept, causality, determinism. They find, the universe is deterministic, things have causes, but then they still want to assert that we have free will. So one way they do it is that this causal process is actually a physical process that relates to the physical world, but our choices, our human thoughts and decisions are not physical. They're numinous, they're spiritual, they're non-material. So David, what would be your response to that kind of assertion?
I would like to see some evidence of that. Just some good evidence of that.
Okay. And I think maybe even more so also, let's say there was evidence. Let's say they came up with some evidence, and I'm not sure what that would look like, because to have evidence of something that's non-material, in other words, I think our apparatus, our technology, needs for something to be material for it to show up on our machines, whatever, for us to be able to detect it. But let's say for some, in some strange way, we were able to basically detect something that's non-material. Then the question becomes, why would these philosophers believe or assume that causality is only limited to physical phenomenon? Why wouldn't causality also govern this numinous spiritual world?
Yeah, see, George, that's the whole point, is that even if there was such a numinous, spiritual, whatever, immaterial thing, which, like David Joseph, I'd like evidence of, and evidence implies that it has to be physical, so there's a problem. But that doesn't escape causality anyway, because if they're trying to say that their spiritual decisions or whatever are completely free from causality, well, then here's the deal. Well, that's the weirdest thing, because notice that every decision people blame for still had to start. First of all, it had to start with a cause, and the cause that we can identify is always a physical thing. So even if the decision to drive drunk was a spiritual decision, and I don't know how that works, like how driving drunk would be a spiritual decision, there still has to be the physical alcohol. There still has to be the physical car. And so not only are your spiritual decisions not free from causality, but your spiritual decisions aren't even free from the material world.
Yeah, and this always bugged me, right, about, now that I think about it, now that I learned that free will is impossible and stuff, this always bugged me. Why is it that, there's other things that require a burden of proof, like, if you're claiming that someone committed a crime, or you're claiming that God exists or whatever, why is it that those things require a burden of proof, but free will is somehow exempt from that?
That's a good question, Jamie.
Okay, and another compatibilist version of free will is they one of the challenges to free will is that we have an unconscious, and that's actually the part of our brain that decides things. That we were, our last podcast, we explored that if the data and the principles and the processes for deciding are in the unconscious, then obviously the decision has to be in the unconscious. So, but some compatibilists will say that some people can actually learn to control unconscious processes. I think you guys might have heard of this, that somebody learns how to, let's say, speed up or slow down their heart rate, or their, these autonomous, functions, bodily functions. So how would you explain that being able to do that is not really actually a defense of free will?
Well, first of all, the idea of, controlling unconscious things in your body anyway is kind of a bizarre thing, because if you're not aware of something, how can you possibly control it anyway? And the heartbeat would be something that you are aware of. And there would be trial and error ways to speed up or slow down your heart rate, but the process would still be causal. So I'm not sure where they're getting that and how they use that. I don't get it.
That's a great point, Chandler. So in other words, like what they're really referring to is, aspects of our, functioning or behavior that, are ordinarily unconscious, but we can become first aware of them, and then like we might be able to control them. Excellent point.
I think Sam Harris mentions something like this with his idea of meditation and being able to slow your heartbeat and things like that. But I've never heard of anyone being able to kind of produce more white blood cells or something like that. I think that would be impressive.
And the thing is, how do you know how many white blood cells you have at the current moment? Like, I don't even know the number of white blood cells. That's weird.
Yeah, lots, I think. I think it's lots.
Yeah, another thing, for example, like we don't, and this is kind of a funny example, but there is this one part in the Bible where Jesus said something about how you cannot make one hair white or black. And I'm like, well, it's true. It's not like you can consciously just change the color of your hair, by worrying or whatever. And that's an interesting point. Like, we don't have the type of control over our bodies, and it depends on how you define control, when you realize that nothing's really up to us anyway. But you start realizing, well, wait a minute, we don't choose our emotions, we don't choose our gender, we just don't choose these things, nor can we schedule them. Like, if you could actually schedule your hair to turn a certain color, or schedule to fall in love with a certain person at a certain time of the day, I suppose many people would define that as control, but we can't do that.
Yeah, I think we have to kind of like acknowledge that, yes, certainly our conscious mind can't control anything, because again, we have to like keep repeating this idea that consciousness is simply awareness. Consciousness is not a decision-making mechanism. So it's our unconscious that makes these decisions. And like what's interesting in medicine is you have abundant examples across all medical disciplines of what's known as the placebo effect. That, let's say, a person is given a sugar pill, is told, oh yeah, this is going to cure you. And this is, cured a lot of different kinds of ailments, all different types. And for some reason, a part of the unconscious will, in fact, somehow change the physiology, just like produce more white blood cells, produce whatever kinds of agents are needed, antigens or antibodies, whatever, to fight off whatever is happening. So that's a pretty fascinating kind of like aspect of our human physiology that, again, has to occur at the level of the unconscious. But the key point, of course, is that if because that's happening at the level of the unconscious, that's not free will. It's just not up to us to be able to do that.
Right. And you know what, George? That gets into a whole system of ethics. Like, people believing false things actually benefits them in that case, because they're told that some pill will cure them when it actually isn't meant to necessarily, but because they believe it will have an effect, that sort of makes it have an effect. And then, yeah, that gets into a whole other topic there of like, do our beliefs change our reality in some way?
So are you talking like more about positive beliefs kind of thing? Just having a more positive outlook can
well, David, even more than that, there was an experiment done several decades ago. Kids with leukemia, I think it was, they were instructed by their doctors to imagine inside their bodies there were these spaceships that were like attacking the cancerous cells, like just like a video game or something. And these kids were just, that's what the instruction was. And apparently the kids who were able to do that did, have a certain degree of remission from that, that leukemia and all. So yeah, it is a matter of kind of like being able to control physiological processes with our mind, in a sense.
Right. Okay. But I guess the point to that would be that they were instructed to visualize these things.
And of course, again, like, the key thing is that, that the unconscious, their unconscious is actually, I mean, they might have been conscious of their doing that, but again, like we have to keep emphasizing that all of our actions first occur at the level of the unconscious, and our awareness or our consciousness of those actions is simply being aware of them. It has nothing to do with the real decision making.
I've heard Daniel Dennett mention something about free won't. Is that something you guys are familiar with? Or?
All right, yeah, that seems to be that seems to fall under the compatibilism. Yeah, you want to explain?
No, I'm actually completely confused by it. Whenever
all right,
he talks,
Chandler, Jamie, are you familiar with that, or?
Yeah, I've heard of. I think I read about it in a blog post or something. This idea of free won't, like that you become conscious of your desire to do something, but that you can veto it somehow, and they call that free won't.
Right. Okay. This originated with the Lebesgue experiments. Where the researchers found that initially in the first experiments, about 300 milliseconds before a person was conscious of their decision to flick a finger or press a button or something, the researchers could measure muscle activity that showed that the unconscious had actually made that decision before they were, aware of it. And again, like it's not, now we're up to about 10 seconds that researchers can determine when the decision was actually made, 10 seconds before we're aware of it. So like what they said in terms of the free won't is that like within those 300 milliseconds initially between the time where this, what's known as the readiness potential is activated, and that, that simply means that the muscles are going to act, or actually, well, it's a bit confusing. Wait a minute. Yes, as my understanding is the readiness potential means that the muscles are absolutely going to act. And between that and the time a person becomes conscious of that, it's like 300 milliseconds. And within that time, they were positing that that we can like actually veto that action, that inevitable readiness response action. But actually, I'm just thinking about it now, like, it's been refuted in different ways, but one way to refute that is like the readiness potential cannot be vetoed. The readiness potential is simply, physiological response that demonstrates that muscle is absolutely going to respond. And so like if there were, let's say, I may not be remembering this correctly. So like if there were a couple, let's say 100 milliseconds before that readiness potential happened that they're claiming, there might be the possibility of our vetoing it's ultimately happening. Then what they don't understand is that, they, according to causality, basically there would have to be a cause for that too. So no, in other words, it's not just the unconscious aspect of this, these experiments that they have to address. They also have to address the causality. So like it's, that if our unconscious were to decide to veto, a decision, this free won't idea, there would be a causal regression behind that.
Exactly. If you veto it, there's a cause for vetoing it, but it goes even worse than that, George, and here's why. Because basically, since you still don't control the causal process that leads to the desire to do a certain thing, even if you can veto it, you're still not the cause of the thing that you're vetoing. So you're still not even in control of what you're vetoing, even if you have that veto power, which we really don't.
Yeah, but
Exactly.
like Susan Blackmore said in what's it called, documentary about the motor cortex. The readiness potential is one of the hard evidences against free will. So.
All right. Can we think of any other compatibilist definitions of free will?
I can't.
There's got to be something else, because I mean, it's really weird because yeah, all I know is that it almost is always phrased in the context like, you know, if no other human is you know, physically forcing you to do something through, you know, a like gun to the head or some other kind of threat, well then you're acting of your own free will. But what if a bird poops on your head and causes you to go to a bathroom sink somewhere and wash off your head? That bird caused you to do that. It was not your free will because a bird did it. But then you have to realize a bacteria, a virus that makes you sick is also not your control, and so that causes you to do things. So why do they have humans in this special category? And I've just noticed that human exceptionalism, where humans are seen in an entirely different category than every other life form out there. And Daniel does it this way. He says free will is something only humans have. And how he expects to defend that claim, I have no clue.
Absolutely. And in terms of like, you know, you're right. I think one of the definitions is like if nobody's forcing you to do something, you have, you know, you have a free will according to their understanding. But yeah, like let's say, you know, they say somebody puts a gun to your head. Well, actually, there have been, I think, people that, you know, like at gunpoint, you know, they say, give me your money or your life, whatever. And people have not been afraid of that. And, you know, maybe they've been killed or whatever. But and with the bird example and stuff, you know, the person may not go to the fountain and wash themselves or whatever. So their claim is that we still have a choice of whether to do something or not. You know, the choice is fundamentally ours, regardless of what somebody else might do. But again, you know, I think their real problem is that they claim to accept causality. Again, compatibilism claims to agree that determinism governs everything, but they don't see how in these cases, you know, whether it's like somebody with a gun to us or a bird or whatever, that if it's our quote unquote decision, that decision is always going to be followed or regressed by this chain of cause and effect that spans back to before we're born. I mean, that's the key. You know, I think they claim to accept causality, but they either don't really or they don't understand the implications of causality on human decisions, because otherwise they couldn't make the claim that any decision was in any way up to us.
Well, you know what? I'll probably get some hate mail for this statement that I'm about to say, but I don't think compatibilists are true determinists, because what they're acting is like, yeah, everything has a cause except what I choose to do. So what they're doing is they're trying to be a hard determinist and a libertarian at the same time whenever it suits them. They're sort of like, you know, people who cherry pick the Bible to support whatever they want, you know. It's sort of like well, things are caused when I want them to be, and when I don't want them to be caused by something outside of my control, they're not.
And the assumption that there's free will in the deterministic framework is still the God of a gaps argument. I mean, there's still no evidence for free will.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy. What?
I've heard Trick mention in previous podcasts about people come along and they say that we're free because we may be influenced by our environment, but we're also creating our environment at the same time. So on that basis, we're technically free, according to them.
Ah, great example, David. So basically they're saying it's like, it's another version of we are the actual, that we're kind of like, you know, taking part in the decision, right?
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, that's another version of like, kind of like we're doing it, right? You know, it's like, but again, if we apply that to calculators or to cars, for example, cars, you know, they drive, they turn, they're taking part in what the driver makes them do. But obviously we wouldn't, you know, ascribe free will to a car.
Yeah, it's basically the same old thing. Like, well, it's still you doing it, even though you were caused to do it by causes before that you were even conceived, you know? So they're still missing the point. That seems to be the number one argument by compatibilists. Well, it's you that did
Yeah.
it. So
It's,
I,
it's funny you bring up the car because in the UK they're just starting to introduce driverless cars. They're like these little pods that drive themselves.
Yeah, that's
So
amazing.
yeah. So how long will it take before they actually say that these cars have free will?
yeah, I can just see it now. They're gonna say these cars have free will, man. Well, we're a little past 30 minutes on my timer here, so I guess I need to close this podcast and then we'll do others. Well, you've been listening to Free Will, Science and Religion with Chandler Klebs, Jamie Soden, David Joseph, and George Ortega. We've been going through the different compatibilist defenses of free will and why they're all totally wrong. We'll see you in future episodes. Bye.